Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, True Crime with E. That's me. I am so very thankful for all of you who have been sharing my, videos and links and all that. I'm going to say this every single video. I'm super thankful for all of you who have been supporting me, because at the end of the day, you're sharing these people's stories and just helping in ways you couldn't even imagine. So thank you so much, and I hope I only continue to grow from here. And anybody that has any feedback or anything, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear it, because at the end of the day, I'm really here to just help families share their loved ones' stories. So thank you so much, all of you. You truly, I'll say it every single time, you truly have no idea the impact you've had on my life, and I'm sure others at this point. So thank you. So to get started, the first two cases I covered had a ton of information on them. I think the parents of those individuals, Elizabeth Barraza and Destry Allen, did a really great job of keeping record of everything that happened. There was like timelines, and so I had a lot of really, great information from those. It wasn't really the same for this case. I got all of this information from different news outlets, and so there's going to be a couple times that I point out where certain things were reported differently. And it's just unfortunate that I couldn't find, a lot about personal lives and things like that, because I think the most important part of what I'm doing is talking about the victims and who they were, and so that we all remember them. And this case, I didn't get a lot of that, but I did my very best, and so we're going to kind of go from there. Sheri Coleman was born July 3rd, 1977. Her parents were Donald Weiss and Angela DeSico. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a ton of information about Sheri's early life, like I said. But at the time of her death, she was 31. Her two boys, Garett at 9 and Gavin at 11. She loved her boys more than anything and always made people laugh. Gavin was often said to resemble his mother's firecracker personality, while Garett was a bit more reserved, but in the end of it all, they were really great, respectful kids. Christopher Coleman was born in 1977. His parents were Ron and Connie Coleman. Ron and Connie were pastors in Monroe County, Illinois. Their non-denominational church drew in hundreds of people every week, so he grew up in a very religious household and evolved his life around that religious background. At the time of the murders, he was working for a televangelist, Joyce Myers, of Joyce Myers Ministries. He was her personal security guard, earning over $100,000 salary, and she hired him in part because she knew him growing up.
Not understand at all. Spent a few years being totally confused and miserable, and almost lost your faith a number of times, and now you look back and you know now why that had to happen.
Sheri Weiss met Chris Coleman at a canine training seminar at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio back in May 1997. Sheri, 21 at the time, was an MP in the Air Force, and Coleman, 22, was a Marine. After about a few months of dating, they found out Sheri was pregnant with Garett, and they got married. Gavin was born about 2 years later. This is something the parents will say was really out of character for him, because, again, he grew up in such a religious household that, having a baby out of wedlock was just a huge deal to his parents. But anyway, the Coleman family lived in a 2-story home in the 2800 block of Robert Drive in Columbia, Illinois. Chris's parents lived only a short drive away. They were often described as a wonderful couple with a beautiful family, some friends even calling them Ken and Barbie.
Vanessa Rigorex, who lived down the street, said the Colemans appeared to have a perfect life, raising their 2 beautiful sons.
I always thought of them as the American family, the perfect family. Everybody would want their children like these two boys, polite, always helpful.
On May 5th, 2009, Chris left to the gym a little after 5:30 a.m. He called Sheri from the driveway and left a message. He also texted her a few times, while he was at the gym. After hearing no response from all these calls and text messages, he calls Detective Sergeant Barlow, his neighbor at the time, requesting a welfare check. Detective Sergeant Barlow waits for another officer from the Columbia Police Department to arrive. Once there, they discovered a basement window was open. They entered, and the first thing they noticed were words on the walls in red spray paint saying, "I am always watching, you have paid, punished," and many other things. Continuing their search, they go up the stairs and they discover the bodies of Sheri, Gavin, and Garett lying in their beds. Each person had been strangled with a cord of some type, and the ligature marks were etched into their necks. Garett even had spray paint on the sheet that was over his body. So, kind of going back a little bit before this happened. In November 2008, only 6 months before the murders, emails accusing the televangelist Joyce of preaching pretty much BS and threatened to kill Chris's family. And Chris at this time is just her bodyguard. These emails were sent to Joyce, Joyce's son, Danny, and Chris. And they came from an email that was called destroychris@gmail.com. In January 2009, Chris spoke to his neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow of the Columbia Police Department, about a letter threatening his family that had arrived in his mailbox. Extra patrol was put out in the area, and Barlow even put a surveillance camera in his home pointed directly at the Coleman's mailbox, but nothing ever comes of this. In April 2009, Chris reports another threatening letter. It says, "This is my last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to happen." From this, still, officers cannot find anything. Now, going back to the day of the murders, Chris arrives back at his home, and Reverend Jonathan Peters delivers the news to Chris that his family has been killed. Now, of course, the first person always looked at is the spouse, so police take him in for questioning. And at that point, investigators start taking note of every single thing he says and does. Things start to kind of stick out to them that are just odd, and first was the fact that Chris never asked how his family died. He at the crime scene didn't try to go into the home. And I've said this before, is people grieve in different ways, handle trauma in different ways, but this is definitely something for them to note. And he also, his overall demeanor was just kind of off. Like, he would cry, but then he'd be fine the next second. Just some really odd things. He also asked detectives for a blanket, because he said he was cold, even though the investigators felt the room was warm, and they really think it was to cover up his arms.
I mean, is there anything I can get? You're freezing? Yeah. Okay.
Police say Coleman tried to hide them during his interview.
You can see on the video where he's asking for a blanket because he says he's cold. The only part of his body he covers up are the, suspected marks on his arm.
That'll work on it.
Yes, if I should cover my arms up.
So during questioning, Barlow notes the red marks on his arms, and this is one of those situations where different outlets reported different things. In a 48 Hours episode, it states that Chris claimed he got the scratches the day before when he was removing a satellite dish from his roof. And then in an article from St. Louis Magazine, it states that Chris says during the police interview, "I think it was when I was, the gurney and the ambulance, I was hitting the pillow." Reverend Peters does testify in the court case that comes of this later that Chris and him were sitting in the back of an ambulance, and he notices Chris kind of look down at red marks on his arm and ask himself, he goes kind of, how did that get there? And then moments later, Chris begins banging his fist onto the gurney. I could not find any actual interview footage proving one or the other. As questioning continues, detectives learn of some marital problems that they were having. Sheri had told friends on different occasions how Chris wanted a divorce and how he felt Sheri and the kids were kind of in his way. Chris says that while they did have problems, they were attending counseling, and at the time, they were doing really great.
This last December?
Yeah, and I went to Joyce with it, told her about it, or Danny, I can't remember which one, and they knew about it, and they suggested that we meet with somebody and see if we could work out whatever it was. And really all it was just communication, not communicating very well. And so...
Did you meet with somebody?
Yeah, Mike Shepard, the guy that's here downstairs in the lobby.
Okay.
And we've been meeting with him pretty regularly, and things have been going pretty awesome.
Then came suspicion over Sheri's friend, Tara Lentz. Sheri and Tara were best friends at Largo High School in Florida. At the time of the murders, Tara lived in St. Petersburg, Florida. When asked about Tara, Chris said, the two of them were friends, it was nothing. Occasionally they would have a little phone flirtation, but it was definitely not an affair. They were really just friends.
Right. Had you seen anyone else outside of your wife in a romantic way?
No.
So, of course, officers in Florida begin questioning Tara. They track her down and question her about the nature of her relationship with Chris at the same time. They find out that the two had visited Arizona and Hawaii while Chris was traveling for work. They also know that they exchanged promise rings and were planning on getting married in January 2010. Despite these things coming up and an affair being revealed, it's not enough evidence to say that Chris was the one who committed these murders. So after about 6 hours of interviewing Chris, they let him go. A candlelight vigil was held by the community. At this time, a lot of the community members were just, terrified because nothing like this ever really happened in the area that they lived. It was a suburban neighborhood, and so they were very shocked to hear of this happening. And of course, they loved Sheri and those kids. They were a really big part of the community. The community even got together to create a memorial for the family.
The memorial in their subdivision is awesome. There's a bench and there's trees.
Every day, friends and neighbors are reminded of the beautiful lives that were stolen from them.
The community got together and created that, so they wanted to do something positive.
Coleman's family held funerals on May 8th or 9th. Again, this is something that was a discrepancy in different news reporting. But it was held at Evergreen Cemetery in Chester. What stood out from the funerals held by Coleman's family was that no one spoke about Sheri, Garett, or Gavin at all. Which is just, you lose your wife and kids, and then his parents lose, their grandkids, yet they can't say anything at the funeral. Again, like I said, people grieve differently, but it's just something that's just very odd. So while all, time is moving on, police continue to investigate, and they find that multiple windows were unlocked in the home at the time, which is really strange considering the family was receiving death threats at this time. You would think that if your family is getting death threats, you would, be more vigilant about locking your doors and windows and just keeping a better eye on things going on, but it was not like that in the home. The camera that Barlow had installed never revealed anyone suspicious in the neighborhood, and the camera Chris claimed to install, he said showed a suspicious hooded individual outside of their home. But of course, he didn't have any type of recording device for this, so that footage is never seen. Sheri's autopsy reveals that she fought with her killer, and she did have 2 black eyes at this time. This makes the scratches on Chris's arms even more suspicious. After forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden determined that Chris's family was murdered before Chris left the house that morning, the police knew Chris was guilty. Because in the interviews, the police straight out asked him, were they alive when you left your home? And he said yes. And they even revealed to him that they know that that's not the truth. And he just basically throws it off, and he's just like, I don't know what you mean. They were alive when I left.
When you left the house this morning, was your wife alive?
Oh, yeah.
What would you say if I told you that I don't think she was?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think she was. I mean, she was.
So Bodden states that they were likely killed before 3 a.m. and definitely before 5 a.m. Bodden was a forensic pathologist that starred on HBO's Autopsy, and he had worked on many celebrity deaths in the past, and so he's got a lot of really great experience. So with that being said, we would like to think that, he does a good job. On May 19th, 2009, Chris was arrested at his parents' home and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. After lengthy delays, trial began on April 25th, 2011 in Waterloo, Illinois, which was 2 years after the murders. Jurors had to be selected from a different county to avoid the possibility of a tainted jury. During the trial, more of the circumstantial evidence starts to come to light. A computer forensic analysis told jurors the threatening emails that were sent to Chris were actually sent from his own laptop using his login information. The Gmail account was also created from Chris's laptop. Something else that they pointed out was that work files contained a lot of the same misspellings that were in the threatening letters. One of the big ones that stood out was opportunities. Handwriting that Chris even voluntarily gave to police was matched to the writing left on the wall at the crime scene. DNA found under Sheri's fingernails was a partial profile. It could have been Chris, but it could have also belonged to another male with a similar DNA pattern. During the trial, they talk about how, the DNA could have just come from regular living in the home with Chris, but it doesn't rule him in or out on anything with the DNA. A Columbia detective also found a receipt for red spray paint in the Coleman's house and traced it to a hardware store near them. It was purchased only 3 months prior to the murders. They never did find the actual paint can that was used or any paint-spattered clothing, and unfortunately, they also never found the murder weapon. Now, here's my thing about all this is they're saying they couldn't find, clothing or anything that had spray paint on it from Chris. I couldn't find any footage of him leaving his home or his time at the gym. I assume police looked into this, but my thought initially was that he disposed of that evidence while he left for the gym or on his way back from the gym. Somehow, someway, maybe he took a shower at the gym, for all we know. But, again, I would like to think that the police looked into this, but I couldn't find anything that said whether they did or not. Something else the police noticed was that Chris made his first phone call to his wife at 5:43 a.m., which was when he was pulling away from his home. And this kind of stands out because he told the story that he was trying to wake his family up, but it's kind of like you literally did it right when you got into the driveway, so why wouldn't you have just woken them up while you were in the house? And there was really no pattern found in cell phone records that this was a routine way that he would wake her up. In a few of the text messages that he sent, one of those read, "I have about 5 minutes left on cardio, then I will be home." Yeah, he did another 15 minutes of workout. That's neither here nor there. When he made the call to Detective Barlow, he was about 5 minutes away from his home, is what he states. But according to an AT&T cell tower expert, he drove past his normal exit. Coleman typically took the same route to the gym. It was a stretch of Interstate 255 near the Jefferson Barracks Bridge, but this time he took a route that added minutes to his drive. So before Sheri's death, she was also kind of giving friends and family little tidbits here and there. She was kind of telling one person something here, just kind of pieces of a puzzle about her relationship with Chris. A friend, Christine Sincata, testified that Sheri told her in January 2009 that Chris had slept with her, which was a very rare occurrence. But then he wanted her not to think it meant he loved her. Sheri added, "He's not very affectionate to me, so I will take what I can get." Around that same time frame, Sheri confided in Jessica Wade, who was a 25-year-old assistant youth pastor. Basically, you want to see the woman that my husband is having an affair with, which reveals that she knew about the affair. At another time, it is said that Sheri confided to a friend that if anything happened to her, Chris did it. Megan Turnbull testifies, quoting Sheri, Chris told Sheri that she had ruined his life and he can't believe that he can't get away from her and he can't get a divorce. So you ask yourself, why is he saying he can't get a divorce from her? What is the big deal? And it's honestly because of who he was working for. He had made multiple comments about the possibility of losing his, lucrative job if he got a divorce. During Joyce Meyer's deposition, she said she was not aware of the affair and stated if she did know, Coleman would have definitely been fired. But she did say her ministry employed people who have been divorced. So his thought process of, if I get a divorce, I'm going to lose my job, didn't really make a ton of sense. She also revealed that on May 4th, one day before the murders, Chris called to say he wasn't feeling very well and asked if he could take the day off. This was something Chris had never done before. She had never had an instance that he called in to work. Now, all of this evidence is revealed, but the thing people were most anticipating, of course, was Tara taking the stand. Prosecutors finally called Tara to the stand. She told jurors she and Chris met and began their affair in November 2008. Chris was planning on leaving his wife and gave Tara a promise ring. She also stated that Chris was going to serve divorce papers to Sheri on May 4th, but it might have been a typo, May 5th. Photos and videos from Chris and Tara's text are shared. Most of it very sexually explicit. They also show a note that was saved in Chris's phone as Tara. It listed her height, eye color, jean size, bra size, panty size. Under Christmas, he typed promise rings, love, circle diamond or diamond cross. It lists her favorite perfume and flowers. It even notes the birthday of her dog Gizmo and what they planned on naming a child if they had a daughter. I think the most damning piece of evidence, though, was he wrote, "The day Tara changed my life, 11/5/2008. About 9 days later is when the first threatening email was sent." Now, with those emails and everything, as I said before, it is traced back to Chris's computer. And so, of course, his defense team maintains that someone must have hacked Chris's computer. And, now they're saying that everything else is circumstantial evidence and it's not proof of murder. The 2-day trial ended on May 5th, 2011, which was the 2-year anniversary of the Coleman murders. And he had guilty verdicts on all 3 counts of murder. The original jury vote was 7-5 not guilty. Now, what's crazy about this is in multiple interviews jurors had after all of this came out, was they said it wasn't because they didn't think he was guilty, it just was because at that time, all of the evidence was circumstantial, and they wanted something very black and white that was going to say, yes, he actually did. Which I just think is just wild to me that you could say that, like, we knew he was guilty, but, the evidence didn't say that. And yes, that's how the court systems work, right? Is, you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone's guilty or innocent. And it just seems stupid to have said at that time, like, oh, we knew he did it, but we were looking for something, very substantial. Anyway.
But not because they believed Coleman was innocent.
We all thought he did it.
Oh, yeah.
Who else would have done it?
But many of the jurors were troubled by the circumstantial nature of the case.
You wanted factual, tangible evidence that said he did it.
Make him prove it.
Now, originally, like I said, 7-5 was not guilty. Now, on the second day of deliberation, the jurors said they found a photograph showing Chris and Tara with October 2008 printed on them. This proved to the jury that the affair began earlier than Chris said, and showed them basically if he could lie about that, he's lying about everything. It is at this time that Coleman waives his right to be sentenced by the jury because he knew the jury was seeking the death penalty. And the state was in the middle of removing the death penalty. Judge Milton Wharton sentenced Coleman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, after all of this, years later, Coleman's attorneys have attempted to appeal his prison term multiple times due to improper evidence, but all of those attempts continue to be dismissed. That's another thing that really sticks out to me is, when you look at the filings for why they wanted to appeal his prison sentence, they were literally saying that every piece of evidence that was presented in trial was not fair to have been given to the jury. I don't know. Those are one of those things where I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm not guilty because y'all presented this evidence that made me look guilty, and I'm not guilty. That's just wild. Anyway, to this day, Chris maintains his innocence. In an interview with Crime Watch Daily, Chris said he was set up and there was other DNA found at the scene. I couldn't find any real court documents or sources that were providing this information. So, another thing that really stood out from this case for me was the way his parents responded. Like I said, they were very religious people, and they truly believed their son was innocent. Ron Coleman stated he believed his son was innocent because an affair would not have been enough motive for murder. Then Ron went on to say, Tara was just meeting a need at the time that Sheri wasn't taken care of. Well, I mean, every man has desires, and every man has to be respected. It's built into every man. If your wife doesn't respect you, then you're gonna find respect someplace else. He also said he didn't think she was a bad wife, just that during the short time, she had stepped back from her job as a wife. Seriously? Seriously. Absolutely disgusting. I'm sorry, but a lot of these cases where men annihilate their families, they almost always have parents who are willing to excuse their behavior. And it just blows my mind. It's absolutely just disgusting, to be honest. I will also note that explicit pictures of Tara were found on Ron's computer. Chris's dad? Yeah, they were on his computer.
He's been a real gentle person, kind of quiet.
Is there any way that there's a part of Chris that you don't know that could have been capable of this?
Not in my view. You couldn't put something around your kid's throat unless you're a monster.
Yeah, you'd
it's
have
not
to.
there. It's just.
In December of 2012, Sheri's family had the bodies taken to a funeral home in Chicago. The Coleman family fought to keep the bodies in Chester, but a judge decided that a convicted murderer should not be able to keep control of his victims. Considering Chris's own future, gravesite would have been next to his wife and sons. As I said, Chris Coleman is not really one of a kind. We have Chris Watts, Scott Peterson. Really, the list goes on. And it's awful that, throughout this case, especially, friends and family, noticed little things here and there. And none of it was saying, really that Chris was going to do her harm, except for, the fact that Sheri at one point said, if something happens to me, Chris did it. And I'm not saying her family or friends did anything wrong. We can't truly know what goes on behind closed doors. But I think what we can all take away from this is if we have somebody tell us this type of information, maybe just dig into it a little bit more. I'm not saying you have to go full on investigate the situation, but if your friend tells you that their spouse is threatening to kill them or feels scared enough that they're going to be killed by their spouse, I think that's enough for us to be able to be like, hey, let's talk about this. Are you being for real? Are you just saying that off the top? Whatever the case may be. And that's just a way that we can support victims that are in domestic violence situations, things like that. So all of the sources that I used for this case, I will link down below. It'll have videos of his police interviews, the 48 hours footage, things like that. I would highly suggest that you look into it yourself. I want to know what you guys think down below because, like I said, Chris is still claiming his innocence to this day, which is just wild beyond belief. And I'm just curious if there's anybody out there that truly believes that he's innocent. I will say that I did find, which I will link down below as well, a Belleville News article stating they believed that he actually didn't do it, which to me is just wild. You know, when you look at the case as a whole, you have to ask yourself, what is more realistic and believable? Yes, crazy things happen all the time, but in reality, how often? Okay, so is it that someone really sent these threats, staged everything to look like Chris did it, and managed to kill his family, and he somehow didn't recognize that they were dead when he left his home, right? That is just absolutely so far-fetched. I can't believe it. But there are probably people who do. Or is it more likely that Chris, growing up in a very Christian household, saw things very black and white and did not want to get a divorce because it would cause too many issues in his own life? And then, of course, Tara's pressuring him. She wants to get married, and the only way she's going to do that is if he's divorced from his wife. So he makes a plan that he's going to kill his wife and children because at the end of the day, he's got to be with this new woman no matter what the cost. I think that we can all agree that it's more likely he did this. This case I wanted to talk about just because I feel like there's a lot of information out there about Christopher Coleman and not a lot of information about the victims, and that's why I'm telling this story today. I'm telling this story so that we can honor and remember Sheri, Garett, and Gavin, whose lives were taken purely because someone was a complete monster. There's really no nice way to say it. He was an absolutely disgusting human being who was so selfish that he ended the lives of 3 amazing people. And this is also over a woman he barely knew. They literally said their affair started in November of 2008. And he writes in his phone that she changed his life in November 2008. I mean, just an incredibly selfish, horrible human being to throw away a beautiful life he had, all because of this perceived idea of something else. I don't know. All right, with that, I want to say thank you again for all of you watching this. I'm so thankful for all of you. I will continue to say it. As I said, everything will be linked down below. And if you have, a case that you want shared, please reach out to me. I would love to hear about it. I want to be able to help people. That's really all I want to do. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I wish you nothing but the best, and love and light to you all.